to make a big mess. Call it making progress. Blame it on the late night bar fights in plain sight. Can't see her face at all.
Welcome to the Dads with Nerdy Ambitions podcast. I'm your host, Steve Pugh, and I got to say this to my co-host Kevin. You didn't show up today, and I'm heartbroken. I have the wonderful, the amazing, the just absolutely energetic Mariah Howell, who is a paleoecologist. Which is a thing I didn't know existed until our good friend Dr. Brian Curtis decided to bring her to my attention. Now, if for those of you who were listening to some of our previous episodes, you remember Brian kind of talking about this lovely lady and everything she does, and talks about the well, you know what? I'm not even going to talk about it. I'm going to allow her to talk about it. So, Mariah, thank you so much for being on the show. You're
Thank
in
you for having
Germany.
me. Yes, I am.
So making sure there was a time difference here, like making sure we could do this accordingly. Uh, as my head cords are stuck on everything. Uh, uh, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for making, working with me here to make sure we could get you on at a proper time to where, it's not too late or too early for you or another day. Uh, so this is awesome. Uh, let's get to know you a little bit here. Let's kind of talk about you are a paleoecologist. Now, that's the actual title, correct?
It's what I consider myself.
Okay.
I'm just a PhD student right now, officially in working with paleobotany. So
Hmm.
my advisor is a paleobotanist, but the work I do, I feel like encompasses so much more than just traditional paleobotany, which
Hmm.
is usually anatomy and physiology and things like that. So I consider myself a paleoecologist.
I like it. That's cool. It really
Hmm.
is truly fascinating here. Um, Now I'm going to, what's the word I'm looking for here? I'm going to state the obvious here. You're a woman. You're a
Yes,
woman in science, which is
yes.
it's a I know, shocker, awe, but no, it's something like paleontology. It was always that stereotype to me that it was always a guy's thing. It was always a boy's thing. And
Hmm.
here you are to break that mold. And I know there's a lot of amazing women out there in science. I know there's a lot of amazing women out there in paleontology. And it's fun to see this. Did it is it something you always wanted to as you're a kid when like not to do the whole stereotype when my all the other girls were playing with Barbie dolls, you were sitting there having them being eaten with a T-Rex?
Well, in hindsight, my mom would say yes, because as like a toddler, I refused to watch cartoons, and all I wanted to do was watch this documentary series called Prehistoric Planet. Um, but then I went through like all the different phases and things like this. So I had an Egyptology phase and a
Mhm.
gemology phase. And then from the time that I can actually remember, I wanted to be an ecologist and like save animals and stop extinction and all of this sort of stuff. And that was my goal probably from about the age of 7 years old to uh, after the time I came to Germany when I was already halfway through my master's.
Wow,
So I didn't even think about paleontology until I met my advisor.
that's fascinating. So it was just you have always been a science geek. You've always been a science
Yes.
nerd. So like
Yes.
what were who were the role models that you looked up to? Who were the people that inspired you?
Um, a lot of it was honestly my own family.
Okay.
So I don't have any like hard I'm not one of those people that come from a family that have like my parents aren't professors or things like that. So I wasn't born into academia.
Mm-hmm.
But my mom was always very much into nature, for instance, and she did wildlife rehab, and that always made me want to help animals. And so we always had tons of pets, and that got me interested in the way that animals worked and moved. And then my dad's whole family, like we go camping all of the time, and my grandpa would always sit there and explain the tiniest little details about how things are working. And it's like, oh, look at this track. You can tell a bear's been through here. That means we need to hang our food up in the tree. So really, it was just that early exposure to nature that made me absolutely fall in love with the way that the world worked and want to know everything about it.
Mhm.
And then, of course, other role models were Steve Irwin. I watched every single episode of The Crocodile Hunter and anything with Jane Goodall.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Okay. All right. I like that. Now, so kind of transitioning a little bit back to paleontology and
Mm,
paleobotany. Um, because you said you've always wanted to be there. You really enjoy animals, you enjoy nature, and that you really want to conserve what we have here in the future.
mhm.
How does that relate to looking to the past for the answers?
Yeah, that's been a very interesting journey for me because, my family always likes to laugh about this of like, oh, you wanted to like save living animals and now you're studying ones that are already extinct. Like
Yeah.
you could specifically you're looking at extinct plants instead of living animals. Like how
Mhm.
did you transition from that? But to me, it actually makes sense in terms of how my interest transitioned
Mhm.
because the animals that existed back then still function on the same principles that the animals today work on.
Okay.
And so I can use the ways that animals today live to try to figure out how animals back then lived. And of course, that also applies to plants. So even though we don't have anything like a Tyrannosaurus Rex running around anymore, that T-Rex still worked on the same basic biological principles and things like that. And then, of course, the things that drove these species, plants or animals, really to extinction are also factors today in a way. I mean, we're not going to have a giant meteor slam into us and knock us all out like
Fingers
they did the
crossed.
dinosaurs. Fingers crossed. In Germany, we would say thumb squeezed.
Thumb squeezed. I like that.
Yeah, you squeeze your thumbs. um, and of course, they didn't have humans back then doing things, but it's all about whether it's a meteor or whether it's people, it's all about environmental changes and whether the animals that exist are
Mm,
able to keep up with the changes in their environment that they had evolved to fit.
mm. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, I like that a lot. That's cool. Uh, Going a little bit more into,
Mm,
who you are, because we like to get to the origin stories of our interviewees. Uh, and one of the things that was brought up to me is not only are you a science nerd, you are passionate about it.
mm,
You are a bit of a nerd in general. Uh,
yes.
which is awesome. Welcome to the show. That's what we do. I mean, literally, as I'm showing off my D&D and Vampire the Masquerades tattoos here, and my
Yeah.
Toy Story T-shirt that I just randomly put on today. Um, but yes, you are a little bit of a nerd. You're passionate about some of the nerd cultures and fandoms. What are your flavors, madam?
Well, later today, actually, in about 3 hours, I have a Pathfinder game
Oh,
that we do every 2 weeks.
oh,
We technically have four different games going in different systems. So we've played Dungeons and Dragons 5e, we've played Pathfinder 1.0, we've done Shadowrun, um, we've done the Halo TTRPG.
how was that?
Uh, Pretty good. You have to like crunching numbers a lot, but it was actually pretty fun. So it got once in a while it got a little repetitive where it's like, okay, this character literally has like 30 shots. You have to calculate each shot individually and then spread it out among the guy. And it took like 20 minutes to do this one guy's turn, but
Oh,
it was
hey,
still a
it's worth a
pretty fun
shot.
system.
Yeah, no,
And
that's
if you're
cool.
really into the Halo lore, it was
Uh,
really great because it was first contact. So,
it was a
it
really
really goes to that kind of in the past of the Halo lore where
okay.
they first meet aliens, and you are the people first meeting the aliens.
Nice. And choose violence. I love it.
Yes.
So are you a big Halo fan?
Um, Really, it's more the friend of mine was a big Halo
Okay.
fan, and I got sucked into it. So I haven't played like all of the games, but I've played a few of them by now, and I've done my fair share. Because whenever I start playing a system, I have to read all of the lore. That's why I cannot get into Warhammer,
Oh
because
no.
no one will see me ever again because I would have to read it from start to finish.
That's oh my gosh. I'm just thinking alone, just like not books alone, the Horus Heresy. I think there's like 72 books, and each of those books is about
Yeah.
300 pages. My
Yeah.
God. I listen to them on Audible because, I doing all my driving and everything, it's just so much easier. I think it's like the subliminal thing. I think the reason that Audible is so successful is as
Mm.
adults, we miss our parents reading stories to us. And so
Yes.
on that level, we just like to somebody else to read us a story. And then if you get some people like who have like this just like there's this Jonathan Keeble is this guy's name, and he has this
Hmm.
deep resonating voice. And it's just something like, oh, I know this is going to be a fun story just listening to him
Yeah.
talk. But I digress. We did not come here to reminisce about my childhood issues. We came here to talk about you and everything that is you. So I think that's awesome that you do a lot of really fun, nerdy games. Actually, I do
Hmm.
want to ask this. So you do play D&D and you do play Pathfinder. Are you
Hmm.
the DM or are you a player?
So far, I've only ever been the player.
Okay.
Um, so it's because by now I've actually been playing for probably like 8 or 10 years, but then everyone else in my group that I play with has been playing for like 20 years, I guess. So I always think of myself as like, oh, I'm like the newbie. I couldn't possibly DM. I mean, look at these guys. These are guys are like practically Matt Mercer in my view.
What do you play as?
Um, a little bit of everything.
Okay.
I tend to like witches and I tend to like warlocks.
Okay, so you like making the deals. I like that. That's awesome.
Yes, I do. And I like to play a lot of Fae races.
Okay.
So,
Nice, nice.
right now I'm in the game that I have later today, I'm playing it's a custom race invented by my DM called the Sylvan, which is essentially a Fae race that's made out of bubbles. And it's kind of like a swarm collective thing. So when there's enough bubbles, it gets a consciousness. And then if you die, then the bubbles float off. And then they kind of become like individual insects.
I
Um,
like that hive mind mentality, but with bubbles.
yeah, it's really interesting. But then they're also extremely talented with illusions and things. So
Mhm.
even though I'm a collective of bubbles, I look like a little like 12-year-old girl that's just running around putting things to sleep and stabbing them because I'm playing a rogue witch hybrid.
Nice. I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's real
Uh,
fun.
that's great. And you know what? I'm jealous of you getting to play some games. I'm hopefully you have some fun, and I hope that you get to murder and pillage all the things that you want to tonight.
Thank you. We are currently doing a train heist, so that's always
Oh,
fun.
even more fun. That's awesome. Um, so now that we know a little bit about you and got to nerd out a little bit here, and trust me, I could do this all night. Uh,
Hmm.
let's talk more about what you do here as your profession, because you get to make professional guesses and as a very layman's way of putting it, and study prehistoric worlds. Um, in your area of expertise, and we kind of talked about this, is paleobotany, but more specifically paleoecology.
Hmm.
and you kind of talked about how you chose it. But let's talk about more on the technology side of this.
Mhm.
How has technology, because we have progressed as a society. Let's take the last 25 years here, quarter of a century, if you will. And how has that technology impacted the field of paleontology and more specifically your field?
Oh, I that could be a talk of hours on its own, quite honestly. So historically, paleontology was always more of a descriptive field,
Mm,
where you dig something up, you find it, you piece it together, and you describe it. And then you publish that, and then you stick it in a museum,
mm,
which has, defined the ancient world, really. But now with new technologies, we can start really digging into what these fossils are, how they got there, and start looking into deeper detail about what they represent.
mm,
So now we don't have to just look at the physical attributes that we can see with a microscope, even,
mm.
but we can actually delve into uh, isotopes and molecular details and things like that to start figuring out um, endless number of questions, really. So some of the big ones are that I use most of the time now is the micro CT. So it's just like when you go to a hospital and you get a CT scan.
Mm.
Um, but with these, they are much more sensitive and they actually let you look into the internal structure of a fossil without actually having to break it apart. So what I work on right now is these like cones, like pine cones, but they're from Araucaria trees from the Jurassic. And these things are gorgeous, by the way. I mean, it's a hunk of rock, but it looks exactly like if it had been a cone and you picked it up off the floor today.
Sorry, not to interrupt you,
Yeah,
but
no,
like,
it's fine.
I'm no, I'm sitting here, I'm like wrapping my mind around that you found a fossilized pine cone, essentially. And like,
Yeah.
what, how, first off, how does someone say that's a fossil? Or, or fossilized, I should say, because, it's, all right, I need to wrap my mind around this. A
Sure.
seed is a fossil. It can be
Yeah.
fossilized.
Oh,
In
yeah.
the same process as with like organic material from a creature.
Yeah, exactly. So, just
Really?
like a dinosaur bone, it's preserved in 3D.
Hmm.
It's not, so, there's fossils that are like compression. So if you have a
Hmm.
leaf or something, it would just be flat and you would see the shape of the leaf or the outline of it. And you go, okay, yeah, that's a leaf, but it's not something you can hold.
Hmm.
These are from a really famous locality in Argentina where there's just tons and tons and tons of these cones just lying around. And so they're called Araucaria mirabilis. And so they're from the middle Jurassic. And they're rocks. I mean, you pick them up, they're heavy. You can, you poke them. It's a solid rock,
Yeah,
but you can actually see like the individual scales of the cone.
that is
If you were to hold it
truly
up to a
fascinating.
living cone, you would
Yeah,
it looks exactly the same. It's perfectly preserved. And the inside actually has like the seeds and where the holes between the seeds would be and just all of the detail. They've even been able to see like cellular structure.
really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's really incredible. So it's silicified because what happened was a volcano erupted, buried the trees that still had these cones. And then the ash from, I mean, to put it really simply, I'm not a geochemist, so I'm less well versed on the how this
Don't worry, we'll
happens, but
judge you. We'll judge you here.
but then essentially the
Yeah.
silica in the ash replaces the tissue making up these cones, and it turns into a rock in the exact same shape as this cone.
That's so crazy.
So
How rare is that? Like in my mind, is it as common as finding like dinosaur footprints, or is it more? on the rarer side of finding, like, it will say a dinosaur egg that is fully encased?
I think it's more common than people would think.
Okay.
So, my advisors worked with a bunch of fossilized cones from. She focuses more on the Morrison Formation, which
Mm,
I assume with Brian having been on, is that area where Utah and
mm.
Wyoming and stuff like that. So, no, they're definitely found around. And like I said, this particular locality just has tons.
That's so crazy. I'm sorry that totally got you off the question, but I'm
No, that's
fascinated
fine.
about the thought of, like, there's fossilized pine cones. And in my mind, my
Yeah.
next question was going to be like, we make the jokes and the tongue-in-cheek joke of bringing back dinosaurs basically through like
Hmm.
DNA or whatever way. And I'm like, could we bring back a prehistoric plant? And, obviously the answer is probably, I'm going to say 100%, 99.99% no. You're making me question it a little bit over here.
I
I mean,
mean, it depends on, okay, so fossilized, the DNA is destroyed.
yes.
But the thing is, the plants I'm looking at, their relatives still exist.
So, I
So
mean,
really, we don't even, obviously they're slightly different now. But for the record, though, they found seeds in like Siberia in the permafrost that are like 10,000 years old or something and grew a plant from it.
shut
So,
up.
yeah.
Wow. Oh my,
Um, So it's not quite the same as my, I don't know, 125 million year old cones or anything, but 10,000 is still pretty impressive.
that's pretty cool. I mean, they can't flex on you, that's for sure. Your cones are way cooler. But making the jokes over here talking about like reverse engineering, the whole reverse engineering chickens and things. Are you going to reverse engineer a pine tree to make the prehistoric ones? Uh, but kind of transitioning from there, because talking
Hmm.
about the field and all that. Uh, you specifically are looking at the ecology and everything of the whole environment. Looking at what you're doing, how are your studies, how are they contributing to the whole picture here? What exactly are you doing specifically?
So, with what I'm doing with the cones right now,
Yes.
I'm looking at what's called the phyllotaxy.
Mm,
So that's the arrangement of, like on a plant as a whole, that's the arrangement of the leaves. So are they, like one leaf on the left, one leaf on the right, one leaf on the left, one leaf on the right, or are they spiraling around it? But with cones, it's how the seeds spiral around the cone.
mm,
And that's what I'm looking at. Now, that
mm.
has been studied in a lot of cones because they're actually mathematically very interesting. It almost always comes out to the, golden ratio, the golden number, the Fibonacci numbers, things like that. So it gets very mathematically interesting. But what I'm trying to look at right now is how the mathematics meets the biology.
Mm.
So mathematicians have looked at this and they've worked out the math really well on most things. And of course, the biologists have looked at this and they've worked out like, okay, well, here's the description of the embryo and here's the description of how the tissues all attach. I'm just trying to figure out what do these numbers mean for the plant?
Mm.
How does growing in this way help the organism?
Now, does that, with the way that you're doing the study, is it looking at to see if there's a pattern, and that includes, or rather, I should say, with the pattern of the success of the plant, or is it an anomaly?
The patterns, well, I'm trying to see if there's different patterns to different species and things like that.
Okay.
Like I said, this is kind of the early stages of this work, so I don't have much to say just
Oh,
yet.
okay. Yeah, sure.
But the goal would be to hopefully eventually figure out if, for instance, the the mathematics means it's more efficient in a way that it can, does it fit more seeds because it's growing in this way? Or can we look at these spirals and be able to tell something about the um, direction of growth or something like that? Or is there a way to um, identify the different species or different families from the way that they're growing in these spirals in this phyllotaxy? So,
That's that's really cool. That's neat.
yeah,
Um,
hopefully I'll find something.
yeah, I mean, I was obviously, kind of talking about the pine cones here, but what are some of the, if you can't answer this, I apologize, but what are some of the most significant challenges in reconstructing ancient environments, and how do you address them? So you're
Hmm.
focusing right now, you're focusing on the pine cones and these plants specific, but are you looking at a broader spectrum of the environment, or are you focusing solely on these plants?
Right now, my focus is solely on these plants and these
Okay.
cones. But it all plays into the environment eventually.
Mhm.
So of course, the goal of science is that everything builds on itself, builds on each other, and eventually through years of work looking at individual things, you can build up a picture of the environment.
Mhm.
Um, and usually this takes a lot of different scientists from different specialties to really achieve, because in any environment you're going to have uh, biotic factors, so your plants and your animals, but your plants break up into you know trees and shrubs and all these things, and you have pollen and you have um, the actual plants themselves. And when you're looking at fossils and you see plants,
Mhm.
sometimes you have the leaf, sometimes you have the cone, sometimes you have the seed, sometimes you have the pollen, sometimes you have the wood. And when you're looking at these, they're isolated from each other. So a lot of paleobotanists have had to spend time figuring out which of these things belong together
I
because they're isolated. So
Yeah, no,
so it takes forever to figure out, like, these are from the same tree.
I didn't realize how difficult you had it. My heart goes out to you a little bit here. No, I was just thinking about it. I was like, oh, because bones, you can kind of sort of look in the same genus and species and family and everything and just kind
Hmm.
of build the structure around it. And even if you don't have all the pieces, I mean, case in point, Spinosaurus, we only have so many pieces of that body, and then you can
Hmm.
build and make educated guesses. I don't want to say hypothesize, but
Yeah.
yeah, to an extent. And but you don't have, I mean, with all due respect, plants look a lot very similar. They're, trees are up straight and they all have, for the most part, bark. And I know I might be insulting your career here by just being like overgeneralizing things, and I apologize. But from the the common folk as myself, if you will,
Hmm.
it just to me it seems like that's got to be on a whole different level of difficult. Do you guys just like sit around and pass each other your thesis papers, or do you guys like say, "Hey, let's all get to Starbucks and let's go talk about this"? Like, how does that work?
I have to admit, my mind is blown too by the hardcore paleobotanist, because I'm, as I said, I came from an animal background. So when I
Yeah.
went to, Ball State in Muncie, Indiana, I have a total zoology background. I took like one botany class, and now I'm somehow in paleobotany and trying to play catch up here with the people that have been doing it, you know, since they were kids. Um, but a lot of it is that they can figure out, like, we know that this is what wood from Araucaria trees looks like. We know that this is what leaves from Araucaria trees look like. We know that this is what cones from Araucaria trees look like. So we know that all these are from Araucaria trees. Now, are they from the same species of Araucaria tree? Well, probably, but we can't actually say. So every piece gets its own species name. And then
Wow.
later on, if you happen to find, if you hit the jackpot and you find a fossil that's like has multiple components all together, then you can say, ha, I knew it. They are all the same. But then
That
they still keep their separate species for the most part. So
that's so each individual piece has its own
yeah, so the
classic.
leaf has its own name, the seed cone has its own name, the wood has its own name.
So what happens in how often are redundancies here, or rather like mislabeling? If I have the same leaf and you have the same leaf and we both label it different names here. How often does that something of that sort happen?
Um, that definitely happens. So there's a
Okay.
lot of what they call synonyms
Mm,
that happen in botany, especially because botanists really, really, really love reclassifying things.
mm.
Especially now that we're in the molecular age, if you want to go back to technology, the
Yeah.
molecular age means that things are getting shuffled around all the time. So the zoologists and the animal people, they've got it pretty settled. I mean, there's some groups where they're like moving things around, but I mean, in botany, there's like entire families are getting shuffled around as far as I can tell.
Wow.
Um, so there's a lot of that going on, which makes it hard for me because I'm trying to like learn all these things and put all these things together. And like I said, I'm playing catch up because I'm actually coming from an animal background.
That's insane. I kudos to you. Again, my heart goes out to you. My God. Um, so now one of the reasons we kind of brought you on the show
Mhm.
is Brian was talking about this absolutely mind-blowing method of studying that you were doing and that I didn't even know was a thing until then. Trust me, you should have seen it was me, Kevin, my co-host, and this amazing gentleman out in Canada who runs all these he runs these glamping trips, if you will, for
Mhm.
paleontology. So you go out and you get to do all the stuff, but you still
Ooh,
get to go to a nice hotel afterwards. You don't have to stay out and suffer like the rest of you guys who with so
that
yeah,
sounds
we
like
get to
my
be like,
style.
oh man, this looks great. This is awesome. Burr, it's getting cold. Well, you guys have fun. I'm gonna go sit in the spa. Um, so nice stuff, actually. And all of us jaws were dropped because we were sitting there trying to process this whole situation, this whole concept of thinking that because you're studying digested food in
Mhm.
cows. So explain this to me because I know no matter how I say it, it's not going to be good here.
So, as I kind of alluded to before,
Yeah.
this was something that it's really common process here in Germany for agriculture is that you take a cow or a sheep
Mm,
and you surgically implant a hole in it and you just put essentially a rubber plug like a gas cap into that hole. And then whenever you need to, you either put something in or you take some juice out to experiment with.
okay.
And this is really common in Germany because it's a really good way to just directly test if the stuff that you're, as a agricultural farmer, if the stuff that you're feeding your cows and your sheep and really all of your livestock is the ideal food for them.
Mm,
So, it's actually big bucks, big business
okay.
here. And in the US, they actually have some similar processes, I think. I've seen these kinds of cows in Indiana, actually. So, um,
Fun.
but what we wanted to do and what before I joined,
Mm,
my advisor came up with this in conjunction with the animal nutritionists that work on this. But the general idea here was we know what plants are related to the plants that existed when the dinosaurs were around.
mm,
Some of them are still alive. They're different than they were, but their relatives are still alive. And the thing is back when the dinosaurs existed, for the majority of the time that the dinosaurs existed, there were no flowering plants. So there were no grasses, there were no flowering trees or anything like that. It was all ferns and horsetails and conifer trees and like ginkgo trees and cycads and things like that.
there's no fruit whatsoever.
No, not
I,
not
I
until
I don't
the
know why that's a weird thought to me, but I'm like, wow.
not until the late Cretaceous.
I'm so sorry. It's interrupting your amazing story
No, no,
here.
no. So this is actually the fascinating part that like even to me blows my mind because and it's the part that people always have, even I think paleoecologists have trouble wrapping their mind around sometimes, is that you look out your window today, you're going to see grass and probably a flowering tree of some sort, like an oak or a walnut or whatever. None of those existed. And there wasn't like this steady ground cover of grass. And if you think about what most animals, most grazing or herbivorous animals today eat, it's going to be these flowering trees or grasses. So, what do you feed your cow? Well, you feed them grass. But dinosaurs didn't have that option. Sauropod dinosaurs that got up to 70 tons didn't have that option.
It is the nutrition value of prehistoric plants here, going off those. Was it comparable to current modern living plants or no?
Well, that's exactly what we wanted to know.
Look, I found something.
Yes, exactly. That was it. That's exactly the point. Because, way back when, a bunch of people said, well, of course there's no way. I mean, look at it. Look at a cycad. Look at a pine tree. Look at a fern. Like, there's no way it's gonna be as good as grasses. In fact, the idea was that must be why dinosaurs got so big. Because I know it sounds confusing, but when you're bigger, you can actually eat worse quality food.
Huh.
It's something called the square cube law. So you actually have like a smaller body size for your actual size.
Okay.
No,
this is cool. This is
mathematics and telemetry and stuff like that. But like a mouse, if you think of a mouse needs to be eating constantly and they need to be eating tons of food, or like a hummingbird. If a hummingbird doesn't eat every couple hours,
absolutely. I've always understood that the smaller creatures, hummingbirds and everything, because they had a hypermetabolism, and mice do too. But it never clicked in my head that it's because of a size ratio difference. Is it because their size, the same calorie intake that you and I would take is going to be processed quicker for them and not as nutritional for them?
More or less, yeah.
Okay.
So they just need a constant supply of food coming in, and it has to be like probably high value food.
Okay.
But if you're bigger, you can actually afford to eat. You still need more food in terms of actual like kilograms, but it doesn't have to. But it's not as high. It's not more food in terms of the ratio compared to your body size.
Okay.
So that was the original theory of like, why did these dinosaurs get so big? Was, well, their food all sucked.
I love that.
Which, is still probably part of it. But that's what we wanted to know, because it's like thinking about this from an ecology point of view instead of just from a vertebrate paleontologist point of view. It's like, that doesn't really make sense though. Like, look at the density that these dinosaurs were roaming around at the time. And it doesn't make sense that there could be so many animals of this size roaming around and all of the food was garbage.
Yeah.
So they came up with this experiment that, they reached out to these animal nutritionists and said, hey, how can we like test the nutritional quality of these plants from the Jurassic? And they said, hey, we have a test for that. We use it all the time for our cows.
Huh.
So basically, they did this study originally in 2008. And then I did it again for my master's thesis, and my results were just, shout out to myself here, were just published in December of last year. So
congratulations.
Thank you. But essentially, we go out and we get samples from living Araucaria trees, living ferns, horsetails, just these plants that are related to the plants that existed back then. And then you grind them up, and then you reach into your cow and you suck out what's called the rumen fluid. So, cows have these 4-part stomachs. The most interesting part for me is the rumen, which is the fermentation chamber. So that's where all the material ends up in a big slurry of microbes like bacteria and fungi and things. Because the thing is that animals cannot break down plant material.
Mhm.
We have to have, like even termites can't. We have to have microbes that do that for us because we cannot break down cellulose. And cellulose is the most nutritional part of a plant cell.
Mhm.
So we reach in, we just suck out some of this rumen fluid. The cow or sheep or whatever we were using, I've used both, don't care. They just want their breakfast. They don't even notice because there's no nerves in the rumen, I guess. And
Wow.
then we take that juice, we put it in a syringe, we put in our dried up plant material, and we essentially stick it in an incubator for 96 hours. And what happens is the microbes start breaking down the plant material because that's what they do. They start breaking up the cellulose that's in that. And as they do that, they give off two products, which is short chain fatty acids, which is what, an animal can actually digest. And then they give off gases. And we can measure these gases. So they're in a syringe, and this syringe moves up as more gas is produced. And we can measure the amount of gas that was produced and have a direct link to how much nutrition was produced from
That's
that plant.
so one, I have to do a childish question here. Number two, I have a legit question here. So we'll go with the childish one first. You're telling me you can measure dinosaur farts, is what I'm getting from this. This whole you
Yes.
can measure. That's amazing.
And
So
I measure dinosaur farts is exactly
thank
what
you
I
for
do.
entertaining me. Thank you for entertaining me there, because I'm just like, wow, that's the measurement of gas. Oh my God, they're measuring farts. It's awesome. But I,
Yes.
I joke. I seriously.
Well,
Uh,
that is actually how I explain it to people. So
that's hilarious. That's awesome. But so my question then is, because you're using bovine here, you're using cow and you're using sheep,
yeah.
more specifically cows. Uh, how can you dinosaurs? I mean, obviously everything is hypothetical. We only know so much.
Yeah.
How much can we put faith and no disrespect, I mean this in the most professional way possible, the digestive system, the microbes, these probably didn't exist. The current ones that we have obviously did not exist in those dinosaurs long ago. How much faith, how practical is it on that sense? Like, is it really going to be the same on the same side as what you would see in, I don't know, maybe like thinking the coprolite, the fossilized dinosaur poop? Couldn't you, with all due respect, again, I don't mean this in a mean way. I'm like, this is
No,
my
no.
thinking process. Is it going to look like the fossilized poo that you would find? Is it going to be as relatable, or is like as a practical method?
Well, there's a lot
I
of
know I threw a
parts to
lot
the
at you
answer.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, but
But
it's just how my brain was
no,
working. I'm like, okay,
I'm
bug,
I'm so used to
microbes.
answering this. This is always the question I get
Yeah,
because paleontologists, they don't really know how a cow's digestive system works. They're not
yeah.
too concerned with that. So this is always the fun part for me is the bacteria and the microbes that are involved in the digestion process are billions of years old. They're
Okay.
older than the dinosaurs. So, according to the microbiologists
Huh.
and the animal nutritionists, these are going to be the same types of microbes.
Really?
Um,
Wow.
and when you look at, there's actually been a lot of profiling of microbiome studies in different living animals,
Mm,
like even wild animals. So I've read so many of these studies, and it's pretty much always the same groups of bacteria in every animal that I've read. It's
okay.
just that the ratio between the different groups is different. And that is because the animal nutritionists have the answer to this, is that it's not about the host animal, it's about what is being digested. So the method that I use had the animals that the rumen fluid is collected from have a
Mm,
very, very standardized diet because that means they will always digest the exact same way
mm.
as every other animal that's being fed that diet.
Okay.
So you can compare the results between cows that are in one place to another place, or between individual cows, or between the cows and the sheep even. Um, in fact, I tested this extra because I digested my plants with cows and then I digested my plants with sheep, and it was identical.
Okay.
Because
Uh,
the microbes are the same because it's based on their diet.
so let me ask you this. Now, I don't know if
Hmm.
this is still true to this day, but when I was a kid, I used to one of the things I had gotten was a gull or as a stomach stone from a sauropod. And considering your plants are digested by herbivores almost
Hmm.
entirely, would it is that still considered part of the process? Is that taken into factor, digest like actually swallowing stones and using that to help grind up the food, or is that like an urban myth at this point?
Uh, well, according to Oliver Wings and Martin Sander, that's not likely.
Okay.
They did a really interesting study where they had ostriches swallow different types of stones.
Mhm.
And then after, again, it was an ostrich farm, so they were slaughtered after a certain period of time. And then after they were slaughtered, they took the stones back and examined them and then compared them to stones that were theoretically these stomach stones, these gastroliths
Yes.
from sauropods, and they found that they wear in a completely different way. So they think those stones were actually washed in, and so there's no actual evidence
Okay.
that the sauropods at least had these types of stones. But that's still what's nice about my method is that it doesn't really matter.
Mhm.
So these cows and these sheep have these, like I said, they have four stomachs, they have this really specialized digestive system. But since we are taking the microbes out of the system and
Mhm.
putting them into the laboratory, we're only looking at the effects of the microbial digestion and not anything to do with physical digestive capabilities.
Interesting.
So technically, we don't know with certainty that sauropods, if they were what we call foregut or hindgut fermenters, we're assuming they're probably hindgut fermenters because a foregut system is really complicated to evolve. We can make all these like assumptions about how they probably evolved, but we haven't
Mhm.
found like a fossilized stomach or anything. So
I mean, we
um,
found a heart, so it's
yeah,
not too far along. You never know. It's always a
it could still be
possibility.
out there somewhere. And if there is,
Absolutely.
I'm going to be so interested in that.
That's so interesting. Um, so what are some of the challenges you do face replicating this whole process? The nutritional content, the physical properties of prehistoric plants for what you study.
The biggest problem is that we are using the living relative of those prehistoric plants.
Mm,
Some of them are physically very similar to what they were, and most of them are even in the same genus that existed back then. But we can't tell for sure that the nutritional properties haven't changed over time. Um, we don't know, for instance, how a sauropod would have dealt with, for instance, cycads, which are very toxic. In living animals today, if a cow eats a cycad, they get something called the Zamia staggers, where they become paralyzed. Um, we kind of think, well, if they're eating, first of all, cycads in our studies had really, really poor nutritional quality, so they probably wouldn't want to eat too much of it anyway. And secondly, they're huge and probably eating a little bit of everything, so it's getting diluted down. But we don't know for sure if cycads had those same properties back then or not. We don't know if the nutritional qualities changed. So some people, they always ask me like, well, why are they so prickly and toxic if they're not nutritious? Like maybe they were nutritious back then. Maybe. So a lot of this is, unfortunately, as you said, educated guesswork. um, we can only work with what's available to us.
yeah,
So
it's
that's the main
again,
challenge.
it's truly fascinating. I'm absolutely like again, my mind is still processing that there was no fruit back
Yeah.
then, which is absolutely astounding. Uh, Kind of going off of that, since there was no fruit sort of situation here, do you think the cycads 65 million years ago were as toxic, if even as toxic then as they are now, or is that something that as another evolutionary trait?
It's really hard for me to say,
Okay.
but I personally can't believe that they were like a hot ticket item
Mm,
because of a paper that my advisor Carol G wrote, where she compared different traits of all of the different food options that dinosaurs would have had back then.
mm.
And the problem with cycads is that when you bite off the top, they just die. They don't grow anymore. And they grow very slowly to begin with. And the problem is when you have a bunch of these, 70-ton dinosaurs roaming around, plus all these other herbivorous dinosaurs running around. And if cycads are like the hot item and super nutritious and delicious, but they don't grow very quickly and they die really easily, I mean, we wouldn't still have cycads if they were being constantly predated on.
If they're basically, if they didn't have to evolve, they didn't, and so whatever they have, most likely they have from the beginning.
Maybe.
Okay.
I mean, they're probably so defensive because of how easily they die,
Mhm.
and less because of how delicious they might have been.
Okay. My whole thought process was I was basing it off of like sharks and alligators, which really
Mm.
haven't changed a whole lot. So my thought process with the cycads then was if they really didn't have to change too much, here's A, B, C, D reasons why they wouldn't have. Again, you're the expert, not I,
I
though.
I mean, the cycads that we see in fossils back then are
Mm,
physically very similar.
okay.
I just
Interesting.
can't say whether they were chemically similar.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yes.
understandable. Understandable.
So, we were talking about how technology helps.
Yes.
There are some people that have been trying to work on what they call the secondary metabolites. So essentially the defensive chemicals in ancient plants. They're trying to collect some of this. They're trying to collect things from like some tissue from fossils
Mm,
and analyze it with really advanced technology and see if there's derivatives of chemicals that would have been toxins.
okay. Interesting.
So people are working on this sort of question.
That's interesting. I like that too. It's neat, and definitely everything that you're doing is absolutely amazing and truly just delicious in the most scientific of ways. Really, really, no pun intended on the whole digestion thing here, but it is. It's truly fascinating. Um, and I want to kind of wrap this up a little bit here. But like you doing this amazing thing, and you obviously you found your own inspirations and you had
Mhm.
your interests sparked. uh how can educators spark interest in paleontology among young students? How do we inspire the next generation when I guess my personal my worry is, are we going to learn everything? you know how do we keep that
Hmm.
desire, that burning interest to going?
The thing is, I almost feel like you can't learn everything about paleontology because there's so many mysteries that are locked in the earth, and unless you get a time machine, you can't figure it out. But that's what's so exciting is that there's always going to be some new technology and um, some new thing that gets unearthed. Um, and in that way, it's kind of like the deep ocean or outer space, where it's so hidden from us that there's so many more new things to discover.
Nice.
So when it comes to getting, you know, young people and children interested in it, I mean, the first thing is to not tell them to grow up like, okay, you had your dinosaur phase, now grow up and look at something important.
Go be an accountant.
Exactly. So the first thing is not to just stamp that out because it seems like a childish interest, but it's a real science. Um, and it seems like it doesn't have real implications for our world, that it's just one of the sciences that we're doing just for the fun of it and wasting money on. But um, I think there's always value in learning about the past of our world.
Absolutely.
So, just encourage kids to be curious. And if they're curious about paleontology, let them get into that. So many kids I know, they can recite all these dinosaur names, and then 2 years later, they're like, "Oh, yeah, well,
Gosh, that's a
I've moved on now."
oh, that's the
Um,
worst.
but I like to do this Skype a Scientist program, where I zoom into classrooms and things and
Mhm.
just tell them about being a paleontologist. And the kids are always so great. They always have so many questions. They're always so sharp. So I think that kind of outreach is really important, because not everyone lives in Utah, for instance. Like Utah, you can walk 10 feet and go to a museum that has dinosaurs, but in Indiana, you got to drive a couple hours for that, really.
Yeah, you I mean there's you got 2 hours to Chicago or you could go to Indianapolis, but there's
Hmm.
corn in between.
Yeah,
Is
all
that
that
why you
corn.
got into studying plants is because of all the corn? I gotta ask now. Were you inspired by
Joke
your
about that,
Indiana?
well, of course I came back to plants because of corn, and of course I came back to agriculture because of corn.
You were destined. You never stood a chance.
I know. We joke about that a lot, but
So let me ask you this though.
hmm.
Looking towards the future of, paleontology, what is one unanswered question that you really hope that you really, really, really want to see answered?
The digestive system of sauropods.
It all comes
I
back to the stomach.
I know.
That's no, but
But
that's a great one though.
yeah, I so I lead these classes where, since I'm in Germany,
Mhm.
we get a lot of international students, and so we have a class where we teach them how to read, or we teach them how to communicate effectively in English,
Mm.
since they all come from different cultures, languages, and backgrounds. So I lead these like language labs where I just sit there and essentially make them talk by just asking them questions. One of them is always like, should we, make Jurassic Park real? I'm always the only person that says yes, because I want to see an actual living sauropod and I want to know how their digestion works.
You know what? Brian would be right on board with us here, and he would be just like kicking and giggling and being in the same position as us. You know that, right? Like,
Jurassic
absolutely.
Park would work. The only problem with Jurassic Park was they didn't ask a zookeeper.
Well, I was going to ask you that too, because they really don't delve into the plants. They made like a little homage, if you will, and
There's even
where
a paleobotanist and they
there
don't talk
is,
about the
there is,
plants.
and the one cutout scene is like you have plants around here, but you don't even know if they're dangerous, but you think they're beautiful. And which you just totally destroyed that scene for me because in my mind, I'm like, oh yeah, because there's flowers, and you're like, yeah, there's no flowers. Does
No.
the I know you would love the Jurassic Park, but do you cringe just a little bit watching the Jurassic Park, Jurassic World movies?
Uh,
You can say no comment. I won't judge you over here. I love them, and I know they're completely horrific, like inaccuracy
I
wise.
honestly, I don't know any paleontologists that hate those movies because everyone is just so into them,
Uh,
and it's a little bit of, enjoying the suspension of disbelief. So
I
it's
respect that.
like
I like
we
that.
all know that velociraptors aren't actually,
Oh yeah.
7 feet tall. They're actually like little puppy dogs. But, you know, it it's fun. There's no harm with having fun.
I love that.
Now, what gets me is if I'm watching a TV show and they're supposed to be in California and there's a northern cardinal there, that drives me nuts. But
You know what move would actually, and no, this will be my last statement. Supernatural. Did you ever watch that show?
a little bit, yeah.
Okay, as someone from the Midwest, I encourage you to go through and watch those episodes because they do a lot in Indiana, Indiana and Illinois. They most of like their
Really?
stuff.
I
Oh
didn't
God,
realize
yeah.
that.
Yeah, watch it. Like go back and watch the show
Hmm,
because one of the most hilarious things that they did is they did South Bend. And you look at it and I was like,
that's not South Bend.
not even close. Not even close to South Bend. Like all the towns, like like we make jokes about Indiana being like all these little boony towns, but dude, they made them look like it was West Virginia boony towns. And no offense to West Virginia, but everything I've seen in West Virginia, living in Virginia for a little bit, yeah, it's
Hmm.
like these. That's what these, the hills have eyes kind of towns, and they're like there's
Yeah.
population 5 people, and I'm like it's so funny, and that always irks me just a little bit. And the other one is Down Periscope. Absolutely great movie, but the pan over in the beginning is supposed to be Norfolk Naval Base, which is the largest naval base in the United States,
Hmm.
and it's actually Groton sub base. It's a submariner base where they keep all the subs, none of the like surface vessels. And they're like, yeah, it's Norfolk, and I'm like, that's Groton right there. So those are my little things. Now that like, but
Yeah, I feel like if it's a big problem, I don't care because I'm
yeah,
like, it's just a movie, it's just a TV show. So, but if it's
I
like a
respect
small one, I'm like, I get so hung up on it.
it. they they got it snowing in the middle in the wrong season or something of that sort. That's
Uh-huh.
Mariah, it has been such a pleasure to have you on the show. You are absolutely welcome to come back on. We will make sure, actually, next time I'll make sure I have Brian on so we can all just like geek out a little bit more.
Yes, that'd
And
be
we
fantastic.
will make sure we do this in a time frame that is respectable to you, madam, because my God, thank you so much for like working this out with me. Usually I'm only dealing with like a couple hours in my time zones, but
Hmm. Yeah, I
but
think
yeah,
right now we've got 6 hours, so
yeah, no, that was like you were like I'm in I can't remember if you had said it or if he had said it, Brian, and I was like, all right, I gotta make this work. How can I make this work? And it's been such a pleasure, truly. I look
hmm.
forward to talking to you in the future and seeing what amazing things you do and what amazing fun facts we could talk about on the show the next time. Um, so let's go ahead and let's wrap this up on our side. As always, please like, subscribe, and follow us wherever you're listening to podcasts. And if you are listening to us on Apple or Spotify, please remember to rate and review. We're also on Instagram and Facebook, so please like and follow us at DNA Pod or on our webpage, nerddnapod.com. I'm your host, DPU, and I have been joined by the fart connoisseur, the plant expert over here, the prehistoric guru on all things digestive, Mariah Howell. Madam, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for being such a blast. Thank you for being so entertaining. And thank you for dealing with all my childish demeanors over here. Seriously, um, you have been nothing but an amazing pleasure. And I can't say anything but good things about you.
Oh, thank you for having me. And this was so much fun.
Thank you and good night.
Gonna make a big